In the October 2009 issue of TechNet magazine, a senior consultant working for Microsoft wrote, "It's safe to say that the single most important skill a Windows administrator will need in the coming years is proficiency with Windows PowerShell." During the early preview phases of Windows Server 2019, the online magazine Network World described it as a surprise that Server 2019 even had a GUI. Windows Server 2008 was the first to introduce a Windows Server with no Windows, and every version since has included an option to install without the desktop experience. They called it Windows Server Core. In Windows Server 2016, the ability to switch back and forth between having a desktop and not was removed. Then, when people started installing a preview of the semi-annual releases of Windows Server, they noticed that desktop experience was no longer an option. It seems pretty clear that if anyone was waiting for a clear sign that it was time to learn PowerShell, that writing is on the wall. PowerShell is made up of two different parts. First and foremost, PowerShell is a scripting language. Microsoft provides commandlets, functions, and scripts to perform pretty much any management or administration task on Windows workstations and servers. Add to that the growing community of admins that are constantly adding to the repositories and galleries of downloadable add-ons to PowerShell. For an even more customized experience, you can create your own functions and scripts and automate the various tasks that you have to do while administering your Windows servers. The second part of PowerShell is an application that you can use to run your PowerShell commandlets, functions, and scripts. There is a command-based shell specifically for running PowerShell, and there's also an interactive developer's environment, PowerShell ISE, that allows you to create and test functions and scripts with an even more robust set of help and support. Here we are back on our Windows 2019 server that we installed and configured at the very beginning of the course. Here I'm going to go ahead and open PowerShell, and I make a habit when I am setting up a new machine, server or workstation, that has a desktop experience of pinning PowerShell to the taskbar. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the Start menu, right-click on Windows PowerShell, and under the More command, I'm going to go ahead and pin that to the taskbar so that I have easy access to it later on. Let me go ahead and close the Start menu, and now anytime I run PowerShell, I right-click it and choose Run as Administrator. Even if I'm using ISE, which is the more supportive developer environment, I still choose to run it as administrator to make sure that I have the access that I need to run scripts and to access various system components on this server. But for now, I'm just going to run PowerShell, not the developer environment. I'm going to select to run it as an administrator. Once again, already being logged in as administrator, that extra step may be unnecessary, but it's just a good habit to get into. I introduced the basic syntax of a PowerShell commandlet when we renamed this computer, and PowerShell has a command memory, so I'm going to up arrow twice just to once again review that commandlet. The syntax in PowerShell is verb-noun. That is the commandlet. That's the start of our expression. Any parameters start with hyphen and then the name of the parameter, followed by whatever the value may be. If the value includes any spaces or any punctuation that might be confused for part of another command or value or other expression, then I could include this value in quotation marks. And you can use single quotation marks for things that only include spaces, or double quotation marks for anything that could be confusing to Windows later on. There are a lot of commandlets readily available to me. In fact, if I were to just type get command, I'm going to get a list that is several screens long of things that are already built in that I can use on this machine. But sometimes there's functionality that we want that isn't included. Say, for example, I'd like commandlets that will help me manage Azure components. If I were to go ahead and clear the screen just to get a little more real estate here, I could type get command, and I could go ahead and put a wildcard in here. Show me what I have available that has the word Azure in the command. And there's the entire list. There's nothing. If I want to go and pull an entire collection of Azure commands, I can do that. I can install a module. Now, a module is a complete collection of commandlets, functions, and scripts that have been put together either by Microsoft or by some other contributor in the community. And there's a huge repository of them at GitHub. If I type install module and I put the Azure AD module and don't specify where it's coming from, it's going to look at that GitHub repository. And since I've never installed modules on this machine before, I'm prompted to install PowerShell Get, which is a tool that is used to go out and retrieve these various packages. I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I want to install that. And it will go ahead and check it out, download it, install it, and then it will come back around to asking me about Azure AD. That's not a module that it was already familiar with. It's in a repository called PS Gallery, and I'm being asked whether or not it's okay to install this module. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, and it will download and install this module full of Azure Active Directory commandlets, functions, and scripts. It seems to have run okay. Let me go ahead and clear the screen one more time, and let's now take a look at what commands we have that have the word Azure somewhere in the command. This is one of the simplest ways to add to the functionality of your machine using PowerShell. There are modules put together by Microsoft as well as administrators and developers from all around the world that have shared what they've created to make it so you don't have to create everything from start. Windows PowerShell is a highly customizable and highly powerful, possibly the most useful management and administration tool available to you on any Windows server or workstation. In the last video, I said that PowerShell is possibly the single most useful tool for managing and administering Windows servers. One of the features that makes that true is PowerShell remoting. Here we sit at a Windows 10 Enterprise workstation that is joined to an Active Directory domain. The servers in this domain are both running Windows Server 2019, and we're going to take a look at how to use PowerShell to remotely manage those servers. Because being able to manage the machine where you sit is one thing, but that's a lot of unnecessary running around if you have to go to the console of every single machine that you need to administer. Remoting is how you can manage or administer another server, or better yet, all of the other servers, without leaving your workstation. Remoting takes on two different forms. Let me show you the first one. Here in PowerShell, I can start a new session where I'm actually remote controlling PowerShell on the domain controller. Let me show you what I mean. There's a command to take a look at the Active Directory users on your Active Directory domain. It's getAdUser. There's a required parameter of filter, and if I just filter star, then that's the commandlet that will pull a list of all of the users in my Active Directory domain. If I run that command, I'm on a workstation that doesn't have any Active Directory tools installed, so I get an error saying that that command is not available to me. That's not recognized. Well, let's go ahead and start a session with our domain controller. If I type new PS session, I can specify the computer that I want to remotely connect to. So let's say computer name is DC01. And if I was logged in as someone that didn't have access to DC01, I could add another credential parameter, but I'm logged in as C. White which is one of our administrative team. So I'm going to go ahead and just run that. And that's going to create a session. I haven't entered the session, but the session is there. I now have a session with the ID of 1 to the computer named DC01. It's available, it's opened, it's ready for me to use. So now I can run one other PowerShell commandlet. Enter PS session. And if you're new to PowerShell, you may have noticed and wondered why I capitalize things the way I do. This is called Pascal case, and it's the default and the best practice in PowerShell. It's not necessarily required, but it helps to diagnose problems when an expression doesn't do what you thought it was supposed to. You capitalize the beginning of each word, even as you have to run those words together. So if I want to enter PS session, I can specify the parameter of ID and put in the number 1, because that's the ID number of the session that we created. So when I go ahead and hit enter, it looks like I left out a space between ID and 1. It thinks 1 is part of the parameter name, and that's not recognized. So let's up arrow and just fix that. Enter PS session with the ID of 1, and then I'll go ahead and hit enter on that. And here you can see the new prompt has DC01 in square brackets at the beginning of the prompt. That means I'm actually operating on that remote machine. Let me clear the screen again to bring this to the top. And while remoted into the domain controller, I can run getADuser one more time with the filter of star. And this is a domain that was created just for this lab, so there aren't very many users to get, but we can see that it did go ahead and pull the entire list. Once I'm done with this session, I can just type exit, and you'll see that my prompt returned to as it was before. I'm no longer remoting the domain controller. If I clear the screen one more time and try my getUser commandlet, once again, I'm going to be told that the commandlet is not recognized. Now, there are other times that you might want to just run a command on multiple servers at the same time rather than remoting into one specific server. I can do that using another expression. Invoke command will allow me to specify a script block. And then inside curly braces, I can put an entire function or script or several PowerShell commandlets that all want to be run. Let me use a simple one. Let's just say get process. That will pull a list of processes running on a server. And then I can add a list of computer names, and I will put them in parentheses. I'm going to put each computer name in quotation marks and separate them using commas. So I can say DC01, close the quotation marks, and let's go ahead and put server 3 in the list as well. Now, if I go ahead and run this commandlet, it will reach out to both of these machines, and it will pull all of the running processes on both server 3, and if I scroll back up, DC01. Now that pulled a list of processes from these two servers, but I could just as easily pull the same information from every server in the domain, or maybe from every laptop in one Active Directory container. The list of computers can be as long as you need. It could even be an expression that searches for computer names in Active Directory. By default, PowerShell will run them 32 computers at a time to manage processor time and memory usage, but you can retrieve information from a lot more than that. In addition to having commands for every facet of a Windows workstation or server, anything PowerShell can do locally, it can also do remotely on more than one machine at a time. That's one of the reasons that I stand by my statement that PowerShell is probably the most useful tool you can have in administering a Windows network. For all of PowerShell's flexibility and capability, there is an area where it falls short. This text-only environment where PowerShell operates lacks the ability to display comprehensive reports that are easy to quickly view and interpret. Before we get into taking a look at examples of what I'm talking about, let's first go through the process of installing the Windows Admin Center, the newest administration tool from Microsoft. We're still here on the Windows 10 workstation that is joined to our Active Directory domain, and from here, I'm just going to do a simple web search for Download Windows Admin Center. Whenever you do one of these searches, look for something at Microsoft.com. At Microsoft's Documents websites, you'll often find some of the most helpful information. And here, I can find Hello Windows Admin Center, and here's a link to go ahead and download it. So let me go ahead and download that. To make it easy to find, I'm going to save it on the desktop. And it's not even a very big file. You can see that downloaded pretty quickly. I did a little bit of background work on this machine before starting this demo. I installed an SSL certificate because the Windows Admin Center is a web-based administration tool, meaning this workstation is about to host a website specifically to be accessed on this machine, but it's a website nonetheless, and so it will open in a browser. So a certificate that is trusted is necessary to verify the identity of this website. So now that it's downloaded, let me go ahead and close all of these extra windows and just go ahead and run the installer packages for the Windows Admin Center. And it's pretty straightforward. Accept the license agreement, move on to Next. It asks you whether you want to receive your updates from Windows Update or from Microsoft Update, or if you want to track that yourself. I'm going to go ahead and select Use Microsoft Update. I've found that to be the most useful path to take. And as I move next, you can see that I can select a TCP port for the WAC, or the Windows Admin Center website. I'm going to leave the default of 6516, and when we look at the following options, we can allow Windows Admin Center install to modify the trusted hosts so that we don't receive security errors. We can choose to create a desktop shortcut to launch the Admin Center. Because it will always open in a browser, I'm going to go a different route. I'm just going to create a bookmark in my browser instead. So when I go ahead and click Install, it will go through the process of making all of these changes, which, in true fashion, Windows wants me to verify that that's okay. So I click Yes. And then we get the exciting process of watching that progress bar move across the screen. We're going to go ahead and speed that up a little bit so that you don't have to wait too long on me. There we go. Now that we've completed that part of the install, you can see here that we're reminded that we're going to need to apply a certificate. The first time we run the WAC, we'll be asked if we have a certificate and we can select it. So we're going to make sure that we choose a certificate that will be trusted. In fact, let's go ahead and do it right now by checking the box to open Windows Admin Center and click Finish. Here we're once again asked to verify that this potentially system-altering command is allowed to run. Let me go ahead and say yes. And then our default browser should open shortly. Here I am on localhost, and there's that port number that we were allowed to choose, 6516. And here's the certificate. We can select the Windows Admin Center Client certificate. This is the one we were told to look for. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK to select that certificate. And here we are being welcomed to the Admin Center. That's all it takes to install this on a workstation. Installing it on a server is really the same process. The biggest difference is once you're done, you can access that web server from multiple stations around your network. What we just did allows us to use the Windows Admin Center on this workstation. And coming up, we're going to take a look at some of the differences in using this tool versus some of the other versions of administration and management that we've talked about. I mentioned previously that one of PowerShell's limitations is that it doesn't have easy-to-view reports. Let's take a look at an example. If I go ahead and run PowerShell as an administrator on this workstation, go ahead and say yes so that we have permission, I can run commandlets to look at some of the basic storage management information. I can type get disk, and when I look at the results, it will look very much like the bottom half of the old disk management tool that we've seen before. If I were to run the commandlet get volume, it'll give me information that looks a lot like the top half. The only problem is I can't do much with this information. It's not like I can right-click on one of these lines of text and make any changes. These are some of the limitations of working in PowerShell. Here in the Admin Center, however, there's a little bit of a different story. Let me go ahead and maximize this, and for now, let's go ahead and skip the tour. This is the Windows Admin Center. During preview stages, it was known as Project Honolulu, and it's a management tool that first made its debut when Microsoft was releasing semi-annual versions of Windows Server. From here, I can add connections to any of the servers in the domain. I can choose to add a connection to the domain controller, and if I'm pointed to the DNS server that knows where these servers are found, I can type out the name of the server, and DNS will search for it for me. And if it can find it, there it is, found, submit. It's going to ask me about some credentials, possibly. It looks like, since I'm logged in as C. White, who has administrative privileges, it allowed me to make that connection without an additional login. And from here, I can open that server and I can have access to a lot of management processes. Now, I've been using the terms management and administration, and I want to make sure that we're all on the same page as to what these words mean. Management usually refers to the things that you can configure about what a server is or what it has. Administration refers to configuration of what a server does. You would manage things like disk configuration or network addresses. You would administer things like DNS or Active Directory, other server roles. The Windows Admin Center is designed for management more than administration. The WAC can only be installed on reasonably current versions of Windows Server or Windows Workstation. It can install on Windows 10 Pro or Enterprise, and it can install on servers 2016, anything in the semi-annual release channel, as well as Windows Server 2019. But it's capable of managing Windows 10 and beyond, and in terms of servers, Windows Server 2012 and beyond. Here, where you can see that we've added the domain controller, we have a list that looks and feels a lot like working in Azure, and that's on purpose. We can manage several aspects of our server, things that the server is and things that the server has. If I scroll down through this alphabetic list, here we can find storage. And off to the right, we can see the same information that we were able to spot in PowerShell, but we can quickly move back and forth between different aspects of the storage management on that remote server. We could just as easily look this information up on the local machine, but we're talking about remote administration here. Within each category, volumes, file shares, disks, there are tasks that we can perform. We can select the volume where Windows is installed, and we can do things like resize the volume and edit the volume properties like the name of the volume and so forth. All of the same tasks that we could do in disk management locally. It even takes things a bit further. If I scroll back up in the list and go to the Files menu, we can take storage management to a different level. Here, we can go so far as to create folders and to move content around within the drives. We have all of this access through this single admin center. You don't have to install this admin center on every server that you want to monitor. As you've seen in this demonstration, you can install it on the workstation where you'll be sitting when you do the work, or you could put it on a server to host as a website to allow more widespread access to these management tools. This admin center is designed after the pattern that's already been created in Azure, also the admin centers created for Exchange, SharePoint, and many others. The application of this type of web portal for managing servers is a natural evolution, and it provides many benefits to anyone managing Windows servers. There is something that I've observed about Microsoft products over the past couple of decades. While they are constantly innovating and improving both the user and administrator experience, there is always consideration for tradition. With all of the new management and administration style tools, the MMC style tools are still available for the most part. Some of the legacy control panels have given way to the new interface that was debuted in Windows version 8, but for the most part, the administration tools have remained largely unchanged. Here in the Server Manager, we still have a Tools menu, and in that list are the same tools that we've become accustomed to using for the past several years. Whenever you use the Server Manager to install a role or a feature, you're prompted to add the administration tools, which includes PowerShell modules as well as these GUI desktop experience tools. And as we look through this list, we see the tools for every role that we have installed. This is a domain controller, so all of the Active Directory tools are here. This server is a DNS server, so it has the DNS tool. It's also a certificate authority, so the Certification Authority tool is readily available. There's a role that's not installed, let's say DHCP, and so that tool is not in the list. If we were to go through the process of adding a role using this wizard, as was done early on in the course, we would be prompted to add that tool as part of installing the role. Working in PowerShell, it may not be as obvious. If I go and look at the PowerShell process for adding a role, I can use the commandlet install Windows feature. And if I were to go ahead and specify that I wanted to install DHCP and hit enter, it would install just that role without any of the tools. I actually have to remember to use the parameter include management tools as an option. That parameter is required if I want to get the PowerShell module or administrative tools necessary to take care of that role. But let's go back over to the Server Manager. I'll close out of PowerShell. And here in the Server Manager, if I were to start the process to add roles and features, I can go through the initial process just as we've seen before. Yes, I want to install a role or a feature, and I want to install it on this machine. If I go right past the list of roles to look at the list of features and scroll down in this alphabetic list, you can see a category called Remote Server Administration Tools. It labels it as remote because the assumption is the only reason you're here to add a tool is because you need to manage a role installed somewhere else. However, this can be used to install the tools for any feature or role, whether it's installed on this machine or another. And here you can see it broken down by feature administration and role administration. If I expand role administration, I could install the DHCP server tool on this domain controller so that it can be used to manage DHCP, whether it's installed on this box, which is probably a bad idea to add DHCP to your domain controller, or on some other machine elsewhere in the network. Any of these tools can be added by simply selecting them and then finishing the install process. Now, we're not installing the actual role or feature, it's just the tools to manage it, so these installation processes usually don't take too long. And now that that installation has succeeded, I can close this box, and under the Tools menu, I now have DHCP. And from here, I can choose to connect to an authorized DHCP server in my domain. There it is. I can select it and say OK, and I can have full DHCP administration capabilities from this administration tool right here on my server. Now, it's never really been the best practice to conduct all of your administrative functions from the console of a server, any server. That makes things complicated when you consider that the checkboxes to install these tools don't exist on Windows workstations. In the next segment, we're going to take a look at how you can get the tools that are available to do all of this same administration from a machine that is not a Windows server, from a Windows workstation, maybe the administrative workstation in your office. The Windows Admin Center is a flexible tool for remotely managing Windows servers, but it doesn't yet have add-ins for administering every Windows Server role and feature. PowerShell can be used to perform just about any management and administration task, locally or remotely, but it lacks reporting tools, and despite the fact that PowerShell is over 20 years old, there are still quite a few administrators that have not taken the time to learn how to use it. The MMC-style administrative tools that can be added to a Windows server by simply checking boxes in the Server Manager are not available by just loading a screen and checking boxes on a workstation. They are available, but they have to be downloaded from Microsoft. There are only a couple of requirements for these remote server administration tools as we look at downloading them here. The first is that you have to be running professional or enterprise editions of the Windows Workstation operating system. That shouldn't be too big of a concern, because a workplace with servers to manage is likely to be using an Active Directory domain, and professional and enterprise editions of Windows Workstation platforms are required to join those domains. The second requirement is that you're running a version of Windows on your workstation that is similar to the version of your Windows server. Okay, that's not really a requirement so much as a strong suggestion, but take a look at the search results for downloading RSAT, for Remote Server Administration Tools. The most popular result, the one that shows up at the top of the list, is RSAT for Windows 10. The next result in this search was RSAT for Windows 7. You need to install the remote server administration tools that were written for your workstation operating system. That can become a concern if you've been moving forward with your workstations and not your servers, or the other way around. You can see here in the description of the server tools for Windows 7 that it's designed to administer servers running Windows Server 2008 and Windows Server 2003, while the administration tools that are available to install on Windows 10 are going to be designed for Windows Server 2016, 2019, and the semi-annual releases that came out in between and since. I'm going to go ahead and select the link to the page with information about server administration tools for Windows 10. And as I scroll down a little bit, I can choose my language. That's an easy one. Once I click download, I get a list of options. Not only do I have to choose the download for Windows 10, I should be selecting the one that is specific to my edition or my update version of Windows 10. Well, I'm running a 64-bit version that has the 1803 updates. So this is the edition of the Remote Server Administration Tools that I'm looking for. It's a Windows workstation running 1803 update and the 64-bit version of the operating system. Now I can go ahead and click Next. And here I am downloading this file. I'm going to save it to the desktop just to make it easy to find for the installation, and then I'll delete it when I'm done. The file is not that large. It should download relatively quickly. It looks like it is done, running the security scan now. All right, now that that's done, I'm going to go ahead and close the browser. And there's the download. Let me go ahead and run it. Now you'll notice that this file is installing as a Windows update. That is the type of file that we downloaded, and so it uses the Update Standalone Installer to add this to our machine. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes. And once this adds itself to the Windows Update cache, we're going to get the Download and Install Updates prompt, accept the license, and it will go ahead and install this as an update file. Once you've installed, you'll find that you have a new program icon on the Start menu. We have the Windows Admin Center, which we've looked at before, but if we scroll down a little bit, near the bottom of the list, we now have Windows Administrative Tools. And in this list, we have everything that could be added to the Tools menu of the Server Manager, readily available for us right here on our workstation. Between PowerShell with remoting, the Windows Admin Center, and now RSAT, the only reason you should ever have to enter the server room is to work on hardware, or maybe just to bask in the glow of the blinking lights.